Over the next several episodes, we will bring you leaders from across the political spectrum discussing what it really means to work together, find common ground, and move our communities forward. Just a quick note, when we recorded these conversations, we weren't originally planning to release them as podcast episodes. So the audio quality may not be quite what you're used to, but we felt these discussions were too important not to share. We hope you enjoy these insightful, real, and sometimes challenging conversations. Let's get started. Thank you guys all for coming. I really appreciate it for coming and dedicating a portion of your week to the Spirit of Bipartisanship. These evenings are all about sharing experiences, learning new perspectives from each of you, where you're from, who you represent with respect to different topics. And so just want to introduce the representatives. We've got Bo Mitchell, Democrat representing District 50, which is part of Davidson County. Representative Kevin Vaughan, who is a Republican representing District 95, part of Shelby County, and then Representative Ryan Williams, a Republican representing District 42, part of Putnam County. Each of you opted into this with some trust in me, and so I appreciate that. You represent our ideal participant. I'm hard-headed, I hear, but also open to ideas and willing to listen and to share. And so the goal is that we each come away learning a little bit about each other that we maybe did not know before, to make Tennessee hopefully a better place.
I think you'll find that all three of us can live by about 5 words. It's seldom correct, but never in doubt.
Right, so I'm going to start off by asking just a one word for how you're feeling right now. So I am feeling excited. Brandon, how are you feeling?
I think curious. I think this will be interesting. I'd be interested.
I'm torn between comfortable and apprehensive.
It's my general state.
Yeah. I would say chipper.
Chipper. He's chipper.
That's a good one.
I like
Chipper.
that one. Something other than politics that you enjoy doing, that you get joy from. Be it a hobby, a person, an event, anything.
I like traveling. I like especially beachy type places.
Yeah.
I've got a family farm that I grew up on that I get a really inordinate amount of satisfaction from bush hogging it. And so I enjoy working on the farm.
It's an immediate
Gratification.
Yeah.
You can see it's a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah.
this part's done,
Yeah.
this part's not.
Like I loved mowing the yard in high school. Like it was just my weekend hobby, and you see like here's what it was and here's what it is now.
My son, the first time I had him mow the yard, he screwed it up so bad I never asked him to mow it again. Oh, he was Tom Sawyer.
He told me that, actually.
He did that, right?
I would say for me, it's I enjoy fly fishing. I grew up doing it, and then I had kids, and now they're out of the house, so it's super good. Get to spend a little bit of time in the water by myself. And
Where's the favorite place that you've been fly fishing?
I did like the Bahamas. I like doing there, lots of bonefish. But here, my home water, as you would call it here in Tennessee, is the Caney Fork River. So when you go to Knoxville, you cross over it 5 times. There's actually a bluegrass song about it.
Yeah.
But anyways, it's good. So I enjoyed it. It's just a little getaway for a minute.
Do you tie your own flies?
I do not.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's like the next level. That's like the ninja level.
Yeah. I don't have the dexterity to do it, I don't think.
The topic that I think we're going to talk about is bridging the urban-rural divide in Tennessee through economic and community development. So will you kind of introduce that for us a little bit and get us thinking about it the right way?
Well, myself, I grew up in a rural area in Dixon County. Now, I've represented, part of Nashville in the Metro Council as well as in the Tennessee General Assembly. I think Representative Vaughan grew up in a rural part of Tennessee. Now he represents a very urban area. And Representative Williams is representing an area, a rural area, but it has a university that is a fast-growing area. And I think both sides of the aisle, and the urban and rural, General Assembly, now it's more partisan, D versus R, But in years past, it used to be more urban versus rural than it did D versus R, because the rural areas need things that, as you were saying earlier, it's just the perceived jealousy of both sides, whether it's the rural or the urban, trying to get what limited revenue we have, tax dollars in the budget for the things both need, the infrastructure, the business development, recruitment and jobs, that both sides need. So I just think this is a great nonpartisan issue, but it also, from our backgrounds, from the three of us, I think is a good subject for us to discuss.
Yeah, as both said, I really don't think there's that much different. I think it's, we all, Republican or Democrat, we love the Tennessee state flag because it has 3 stars or 3 grand divisions. I would say if we're anything, we're more regional, mainly because we're regionally diverse. And so the things that it's important to Kevin and Collierville and Shelby County are completely different than rural Middle Tennessee or, in the metro area as a former metro councilman. I think that kind of has a tendency, but unfortunately it divides us by thirds instead of by halves generally. And so I think it does make it a little bit harder because everyone's challenges are the same, but the way they get there is dramatically different.
Maybe each of you could sort of give an example of some things that are in your area that might be perceived differently in, say, your area or your area.
I can tell you that I always tell people that Tennessee is one of the most diverse states you can ever come across. And everybody looks at me like, what are you talking about? I said, if you're talking about skin color only, then that's not the only metric that you need to consider as far as the factors in diversity. As Ryan mentioned, the East, Middle, West, Bo talking about urban, suburban, rural, I can tell you that the urban, suburban, is those areas are vastly different in what they're looking for, but even suburban and rural are the same. And then when you start talking about cultures, someone who grew up in Appalachia is a lot different than someone like me who grew up in the Mississippi River Delta. And so whenever you throw all of those factors in, and somebody in West Tennessee, somebody who lives around Reelfoot Lake is a lot different than somebody who lives in a suburb of Memphis. And so the diversity throughout Tennesseans is so great that all of the legislature is a melting pot for all of that. And at some point in time, you can play for one side, you can play for the other, or you decide that today on this issue, I'm on this team, on another day, another issue, I'm on another team. And so that's kind of the way that we see it down there when it comes to legislation.
Can you think of a piece of legislation in recent past or even now that's going on where you feel they're good tensions, because you want representatives from all 3 areas, but where you feel that and it comes from differences?
I think that, y'all may feel different. A few years ago, we allowed local electric companies to provide cable and internet service in the rural areas. Me being in an urban area, it shouldn't have affected me that much. But I've still got family lives in rural Dixon County. I mean, literally this month they are now getting cable and the internet down the road in which I grew up on. So it means a lot, So, I understood that fight a whole lot more than a lot of my other counterparts, colleagues in Nashville and in other urban areas in Tennessee, that meant a lot to those people.
I represent, I've lived in Collierville now for 35 years. But before that, I was raised in Bolivar, which is in Hardeman County, which is one of the 8 distressed counties that we've still got economically. So I always liken it to tell people I play offense for Bolivar and I play defense for Collierville because affluent people typically want state government out of their lives. That's right. Poor folks need government help. And so I'm kind of caught in both of those worlds from time to time. And let me tell you what, let's talk about that broadband. The house that I grew up in, I signed up for broadband because my son still uses our hunting cabin. We had the greatest college football season ever deer hunting this year. We caught every. I mean, it's like we walked into the 21st century.
Exactly.
It really is.
Exactly.
And when I think about the fact, and it's cheap, and I just thought, wow, this is awesome. You know, that we were able to do this.
We're bridging the digital divide. I mean,
Absolutely.
Really, yeah. Like what my best friend from college, his dad was a psychiatrist at the West Tennessee Mental Health Institute in Bolivar.
Yeah.
Yeah. His dad was in Bolivar.
Well, you also look at it, it's like from a purely economic development component, what we're going to talk a little bit more about. When you get to Kentucky Lake and up in that area, if you wanted to grow a business, you couldn't use a credit card. I mean, you could only pay cash. You couldn't write checks, and so you had whole businesses that couldn't grow their business or couldn't establish a business because they didn't have access to be able to use somebody's check card or credit card in order to do it. And so when you look at that, you're just like that. Those are the kinds of things where, regardless of where you're from, whether you grew up in a suburban or metro area or rural Tennessee, your heart goes out to those people because you're thinking, if I were in their place, I'd really want to be able to grow my business or at least provide services to people, whether it's groceries or gas or whatever. And of course, those areas are beautiful and rich in assets, but you also want to make sure that they can provide for their families.
One of the most interesting things I found about the General Assembly is that in each of our worlds, we all tend to get kind of myopic, and we think that everything everywhere else is like where we are. Yeah. And so you forget the fact that there may be somebody that doesn't have cell service in a technologically advanced state like Tennessee. Right. And so what that does is it's a real eye opener for you when you think of your struggles, what they are, versus what somebody else's struggles are, and sometimes it can get you feel a little bit embarrassed about the things that you complain about on a daily basis.
Well, it's like my district. I have Bellevue, but I also have Jolton, which you can't get much more rural in any part of the state.
Buy it now.
than Jolton and then Bellevue. And it's just polar opposites politically as well as otherwise. And I probably have more in common from where I grew up with the folks in Jolton than I do the folks in Bellevue. They just hadn't realized that in November yet.
I would watch Nashville news, and I think the story that you get, fed to you is what's in your news community, right? And then when I started going down to the legislature and watching or talking to people, it'd be like, oh, there's the other side of the story. Right? No matter what the issue was, it would be like a very left slant, but an urban slant. But then, talk to someone, they'd be like, yeah, but here's the situation that's going on in my district. And sometimes I felt like people weren't really even talking or having these conversations. One day we were talking about a bill, and I said, well, no one in the room disagreed about helping children. But, how, as you guys very well know, you do that was a very different idea. And I said, well, what if, you just went to each person's school that needed the most help, and you sat down with like representatives there. You go to his and you go together. But I don't feel like a whole lot of that stepping into someone else's shoes. There's not a whole lot of time for that to really happen. Is there?
Well, there is. I think for me there is, of course. Okay. I think a lot of it depends on your role. It's like Kevin's an engineer by trade. That's what he does. And so he's all across the state. Those 3 grand divisions are completely different when it comes to engineering and wetland impacts and things like that. And so because his job takes him, and his full-time job takes him to a lot of places in real estate, he's able to kind of see the variance between each of those. And so it's better for him to be able to relate to what's going on. So like when I'm doing a project, he actually has a project in my district, which is, a long way from home.
How's he doing?
Well,
he told me the building looked good.
It looks really good. I think I'm there more than he is, but it's really good. But it's a new employer there. They've kind of really made a regional, I'd call it a regional HQ, I guess, for them, and they're a Tennessee-based business, and so it's a really good opportunity. But had he not designed something in his full-time job in Cookeville, he might not understand the Car-Soil differential between here and what he's dealing with in Memphis aquifers and stuff like that. So it's dramatically different. But I think people don't realize that we don't, because we're a part-time legislature, we don't necessarily work in the legislative sphere that much. And so our personal lives and our family lives and our work lives really cross-pollinate in a lot of ways. Because I was laughing the other day. There's a colleague of mine who has 4 construction projects. So he's a site work and infrastructure guy, and I have 4 projects, 3 in the metro Nashville area, and we don't get along very well, but in legislative stuff. But he works for me, and we have a really good relationship. And I think a lot of people don't realize that there is a lot of benefit to the relationship that you develop there. But you also get to understand. I understand why he wants to do some of the things he's wanting to do legislatively, because I see him often.
How do you think the Nashville representatives do about being able to get out and understand these other?
Well, I think I have a different perspective because I've just been around a little bit longer than a lot of people. I've worked as a staffer in the General Assembly. I've worked in the governor's administration. I see it as important. Do Ryan and I agree much? No. Do Kevin and I? No. But do I consider?
We agree a little
well,
bit.
yeah,
No,
but I mean we do. But do I consider
What do you
them?
think's wrong with them?
What do I consider us
lot.
good friends? I've got to know them personally, and I have a role, I have a job I have to do to represent my 70,000. He's got to represent his community. He's got to represent his community. But at the end of the day, we've got to do what's best for the state. But I think I've tried to do more than I think a lot of my colleagues in my caucus to build relationships with people on the other side. And people in my caucus say, they let you say and do a whole lot more than we get to.
And we come off the House floor sometime. I was like, Bo, I know you got to do that, but that was a little over the top.
or either I'll come on and say, that was some of your best work tonight.
Exactly.
Bo, do you realize how many times you spent?
If Kevin and I ever start conspiring together, the state's in trouble. But I mean, it's build relationships with people. I know he's up here trying to do the best he can for his area. He's trying to do the best he can. And I think they realize that's what I'm doing for the people I represent. But at the end of the day, sometimes, the 3 of us aren't working for our districts. We're working to help people in East Tennessee that got devastated by a hurricane, So, or we're trying to build a new stadium in Nashville to bring in the Super Bowl and the Final Four.
We need a better team, though.
Well, whatever, but they can look beyond the politics of Nashville and say, hey, that's going to bring in the Super Bowl, the Final Four, college football playoffs.
That's right.
Economically for this state, that is beneficial, or whether it's Blue Oval in Representative Vaughan's area, how many jobs is that going to bring to Tennessee? So we each have our partisan little spats, but at the end of the day, I think we all try to do what's best for the state.
And always, that's one of the things that I always think about too, is that sometimes it can get so combative that the fact that I don't doubt that Bo doesn't love the state of Tennessee and its citizens. It's not that kind of angst or divide between us. And he sees things and believes that things should be run differently. I am very comfortable with that. That's emotional and intellectual maturity, when you can certainly recognize someone has a different opinion than you, and you're comfortable with them still being your friend.
And if I shut up long enough and listen to you, I may learn something sometime. Both sides can learn from one another. Our
Sometimes
problem.
Bo's like that kid running down the hill and his head gets out in front of his feet, but he just can't stop until somebody turns his microphone
But what's funny
off.
is there's sometimes that I'm sitting there going, if your delivery system had been a little bit different, you just made a really great point, but people were caught up on the...
But both of these guys know the problem is the extremes on both of our sides. You're not looking at the extreme on either side sitting here tonight. These guys more than I are being forced in a direction that they may not always agree on, but they're being forced in a position sometimes that I diametrically oppose. And
I'm not saying this rhetorically because I love Bo, but I'm just saying I wish this boogeyman could be presented, because it's simply not true. We're all trying to represent our districts in the best way that we can, and I don't feel pressure from anybody other than the 76,000 people that I seek to represent.
That's his way of figuring out why his friends vote the way they do. He just can't believe that we're not.
Yeah, I get a lot of Republican. I probably get more Republican votes than you get Democratic votes. Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't need them.
Yeah. What?
Just that idea of, I know, Phil Bredesen and Governor Haslam have a podcast called The Other Guy Might Be Right. And they talk a lot about this sort of urban-rural divide, right? And a lot of times that's a bigger defining factor than whether you're a Republican, whether you're an R or a D. How do each of you think about that as far as the urban-rural divide and sort of how the parties kind of break down?
I think it used to be that way. I think he and I, understand that, we can understand the rural side of it a whole lot better than some of our other urban colleagues. He's working in urban areas all the time doing projects. So I think he gets the urban side from his rural area. So,
well, what's crazy about this? I was talking to somebody before we came over here, and he used to be the former ECD commissioner under Haslam, and we were talking about different things. I told him we were coming over here, and I think sometimes what happens is we focus too much on our differences and not our commonalities. And I told him we were going to be talking about business and development, economic community development. Him being a former commissioner, I was like, what's one tidbit of information that you would say, hey, this is a really fun fact to know? And he said 85% of projects that relocated to Tennessee while he was commissioner were within 10 miles of an interstate.
yeah.
So what connects the state is the interstate systems.
Right.
And the similar challenges in real estate, you would know it's going to be infrastructure and water, all kind of utilities, the cost of developing the project. And so when you think about that, it's like, really, there's not a whole lot that separates us. Maybe workforce or a trained workforce if you're rural or urban, but it's not really that dramatic. I think sometimes it's really about what you focus on. Am I focused on what I don't have or what I want, or how can I get what I want?
And I think that the one is part of it is because whenever you live in the country, you choose to do without things. What you choose more personal freedom because there's not enough, there's not as much law around. But you also choose the fact that the fire department may not get to your house if it catches on fire.
Right.
And
consequently, your property taxes or your insurance premiums are higher.
Right. So you choose not to participate.
Yeah.
You choose not to participate in the city services that are provided, and so you freely choose to live there. Or your circumstance may dictate that because that's where you grew up and you can't leave. But the whole urban migration that has occurred throughout the last 25 years has really had a tremendous effect. You don't see many kids who grow up in the country now who pursue higher education coming back to their hometowns.
That's right.
And that's
the brain drain problem.
Right, and it really is. And what's crazy about it now is that you see the migration of the seniors out of the urban areas because they want to feel safer. They've got the money to do it. And so it's a really interesting transfer of demographics with this interesting group that are in those rural areas. And then you've got, not counting your food producers, farmers they're there and we're all glad they are there. But I'm talking about the folks that aren't particularly into row cropping or livestock.
That may put, I guess, more of a focus if you're in, representing a rural area to put, for example, like programs into place where you can bring your brains back to the area.
One of the issues that we worked on and Ryan, Representative Williams.
Ryan.
Yeah. Ryan was a big help on is we had the medical drain from rural areas. And if you think about it, that cross migration that people are migrating out of the urban areas as they age and young people are moving in. So we're getting people who have more healthcare needs out there. And so it was, how do we not hamstring ourselves and how do we incite or get people to want to be there as far as practicing new physicians. And so we had to come up with a program that was brand new and get it funded so that doctors in rural areas could get back there and stay there. And it, because of the stats that if you do your residency in one area, there's 80% chance you're going to wind up with 50 miles of that area. And so Tennessee has a huge medical school business now. I mean, we're a net exporter of doctors now. And so, but we had to figure out a plan to keep them in rural areas so the quality of life there would be what everybody would need.
Yeah, but the day's over when a regional hospital or small rural hospital, whether you're in Jolton or wherever, you're going to have a small hospital there. They're going to go out to medical school and they're going to recruit to bring that one subspecialty to their town, and they're going to make sure that he is very successful. But now it's like someone graduates medical school and they want, a house, they want unbelievable pay, and there's all many different things, and you're not going to find the same resources in Putnam County or Bolivar that you're going to in Collierville or in Metro Nashville. It's just completely different, and so it's really hard to find that small subset. I think one of the things that's kind of made the discussion dramatically changed or shifted really in the last 4 years from COVID. As you know, in the real estate business, dramatic number of people moving here, tremendous influx of good new ratepayers because we're a sales tax driven state. But on the other hand, it's like culturally there's a lot of unknowns because they didn't grow up here. They didn't.
I saw a new study today about this. I don't know how they created the metrics for it, but it was basically looking at people who have moved in the last 5 years. Which ones were the happiest? Which ones were the least happy? Number one was people who have moved to Tennessee. Dead last was New Jersey.
Oh, wow.
Well, that sounds like we're doing our job.
Yeah, no. But it's like
job.
Illinois, California, New York, those were the states where people regretted moving the most. And Tennessee is on a roll. I mean, we have a lot of, I think the perception is that we have kind of a lot of food fights in the legislature right now. But at the same time, the state's performing really, really well. And it's like
It's got good bones. I mean,
we've
it's
got
located
a lot of things going for it. We've got beautiful scenery. We've got demographics. We've had I think very good governors. I mean, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, we've had really great governors over the last 20 years that have really positioned the state well. And the big challenge is how do we keep that trajectory?
I think one of the things, it goes back to roads and infrastructure. I think that's where we're kind of, took our eye off the ball a little bit in the last few years, that we need to get back to, I used to kid and joke if Ned Ray McWhorter would have been governor for 4 more years, we wouldn't have had any farmland left in West Tennessee. He'd have paved it all over. But I mean,
he was good at paving though.
But we had the number one highways in the country at the time. Now no one will say that
when
about
I was
you.
driving here, I was thinking this is not the number one road.
No, it's not. It's kind of like I've got a rural district, to my north that I've actually went and sat down with the TDOT with this rural Republican rep, and he's got a 5-lane highway to the Davidson County line, 2 lanes on each side and a turning lane. Well, they get to my district in Davidson County, between there and the interstate, it narrows down back to a 2-lane. I'm like, guys, my part of Davidson County, we could care less about that road whatsoever. You've built this man half a bridge. You've built him halfway across the river, and then you've stopped. You're not hurting me whatsoever. You're hurting his rural city that wants to recruit businesses up there that get off that interstate to get up there to get their product back and forth. I'm like, if y'all think y'all hurting me, y'all are mistaken. I could care less. In fact, you're helping me because most of the people in that area don't want to give up, the right of way for that
domain. They want
for that highway. I said, you're not hurting me at all, guys. I said, you're killing him and his community. They can't grow. They can't recruit the jobs they need. But it goes, work for a state senator. We had 8 rural counties. We needed to bring home asphalt to that district. That's what that district needed, roads to be able to grow, to get the jobs for those folks. And, we've got to get back to that as a state, whether it's in the urban area to keep the urban areas moving, or like you said, within 10 miles, most businesses are going to go within 10 miles of an interstate, whether it's in that urban area or it's Blue Oval or it's whatever comes to, Putnam Cumberland or the Plateau for his area.
Whatever you got out there in Cookville.
Yeah.
Yeah, we
Well,
got
see,
stuff.
Yeah, which one the digital divide? Growing up in East Tennessee, Hamilton County now, which is Chattanooga. One of the things it's really had a lot of success with is touting that they have the fastest broadband in the United States, faster than anything in Silicon Valley, and that's been a huge economic recruitment tool for Chattanooga. I mean, I think they've done a great job of bringing, obviously Volkswagen, but a lot of one of the Shark Tank guys has kind of set up an incubator in Chattanooga. So there's a lot of interesting stuff happening. It just shows the importance of making those investments that are forward thinking and solving that digital divide as a state. I think is huge.
Yeah, we're fixing the federal government through the BEADS program. We're going to hear a conversation on that tomorrow in one of my committees about how much money is coming in for infrastructure and how that money's divided up and who the companies are that are providing those services. And again, like the 470 Hornsby Loop in the Hatchie River bottom, man, I got fast internet now. When I'm up there, I can connect to the office without a problem.
Yeah, we can work. And I know you're right though. I mean, like we in our business,
That's what everybody wants to do, go hunt
we
and work.
see so many people in places like Silicon Valley that are moving to places like rural Tennessee because they're like, we can buy a 30-acre mansion for a third of what we could pay for it in Silicon Valley.
Buying square footage instead of zip code.
Yeah, and you're seeing communities like Leapers Fork, right, where you're seeing just incredible economic development happening in some of those traditionally rural communities because with those advances in technology, a lot of people, not everybody, but a lot of people can work wherever they want to, and that's and you're right, there is this weird urban transfer. People who grew up in the city want the bucolic life, and a lot of those who want the bucolic life end up wanting to escape that and go to the city because
they've never worked ahead of Black Angus cattle before.
That's right.
They had to have to raise those and try to keep them in a pen or in a fence. One of the things that we're talking about folks moving in and that kind of stuff, and is the business climate. And my job in the legislature is as I chair the Commerce Committee, and we had our first get together last week, and I told them, I said, listen, folks, a good paying job is transformational, not only for one generation, but for generations to come. We have the business climate and the infrastructure for business and commerce that's very important, and that's what's keeping this state on the road that it's on. And so I admonished my colleagues a little bit, and it was intended for both sides, and that is if you are in the legislature to fight a culture war, I'd prefer that you not fight it in here. Mm-hmm. There's plenty of opportunities in any other places that are great opportunities for culture wars. But let's protect the business environment. Let's understand what really has gotten us here, and let's continue to grow for people, for families to change, and for people, the self-esteem of somebody having a good paying job, and the crime reduction of somebody having a good paying job. Right. The family building and everything
solves a lot of problems.
It solves a lot of problems. Just general self-esteem, and so that's kind of the way that I try to in our area or in the area that
solves education problems.
I view that as the Bill Clinton agenda. That was we kind of the Democratic Party has maybe strayed a little bit from that, but I think that is like the key is like a good job solves a lot of problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And nobody cares about the social stuff if they can't
Well,
pay their
that's
bills.
that's there to distract us and divide us. That's not there to, like he said, so if you're there to solve the problems Kevin just laid out, you're not getting involved in all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I've talked to legislators before though that couldn't really tell you about business. So it was a purely social kind of platform. And as a small business owner, it doesn't matter to me which side you're on. I think you have to have a strong understanding of business at the base of everything else. And that's not saying you're trading business for lives. It's just saying that if you want me to help this life, I've got to have the money to help the life, right? I mean, you start with the budget. We've talked about it here tonight. You've only got so much money to go around. So you have to make the money to help the different causes to then elevate the people.
Well, there's another aspect of this that whenever you sit back and watch, there used to the teams were conservative Republicans versus liberal Democrats. That's kind of that's the way that things are set up. But you have it's like Bo mentioned earlier, you have extremists on both sides, but there's also this kind of a new wave that cross-pollinates across those of populism. It's almost like, and I think it's probably because of the internet and anybody can set up a web page and all this kind of stuff and get attention. And that is you hold your finger up in the air and see what most people want at that particular point, and that's what it is that I'm going to demand or generate clicks on or get subscriptions on, and then can I monetize my web page? And it's hey, I understand that, and I respect their game, because they're driving traffic and they're generating revenue for themselves. So from an entrepreneurial standpoint, it's a good gig. But at the same time, the fact that some of these folks, from a governing standpoint, it's difficult whenever these folks are chosen as the standard bearers for the core values that you hold. And so that's a new deal that's kind of been introduced through this whole last few years, that coming out of COVID is primarily. And so that's, and you, from my perspective, I struggle these days with figuring out who ordains these people to be the bastions of conservatism or the defenders of progressive thought. It's really a self-ordained position that many of these folks have.
Well, you can't. It doesn't take very long. I mean, in most cases, these people will pretty much find themselves out over time. And the big challenge is there's just not a whole lot of honesty as it relates to it. I mean, and it's on both sides of the aisle. The people on my side of the aisle that are stirring the pot and it's all me, inward focused. And you're what? How can you be a representative and represent 76,000 people when it's about you all the time? And it doesn't matter if it's that. I mean, we had people walk out on the House floor on Monday, and we're like, why do you walk out on the House floor? Or is this about you? Or what about the 76,000 people they're there to represent? You may not agree with the policy, you may not like it, but you have the opportunity to have their voice and vote against it. But when you do that, you're not saying bad or shame on you in that policy. What you're saying on everybody watch me, and it doesn't matter on which side of the aisle. And the reason why Tennessee works is because for many years, whether it was Republicans or Democrats in the majority of people were normal people. They weren't these polar opposites on either side. The problem is that the walls are coming in. You know what I'm saying? Because it's now more entertaining for people to watch when there's so much drama. This is not a reality TV show. We are here to serve people, provide services to them, and create a absolute phenomenal quality of life for them and their generations after them.
So how do you push for more of that? I think you're right. I think we talked to a lot of pretty smart political people who say social media has changed the world, right? Like it's created
the best thing and the worst thing.
Yeah, it's created news ecosystems where you tend to see things that reinforce your view of the world. It tends to, there's a lot of people who maybe have not been educated to be able to source the factual veracity of different news sources. So there's obviously, I think we've got a epidemic of conspiratorial thinking, but how do you all imagine combating that? Because I think whether you're on the right or the left, that's a big problem. Because if you can't agree on what facts are, it's hard to govern.
Well, exactly. And now, from the highest levels of government, used to, you had your word, and if you lost your word in any small town or in the government or head of the country, you were done. If you were a liar, it was over. Mm-hmm. Now, 10,000, 20,000 lies. Just how many lies can you tell? I've got activists on the left to me that if I'm not, I'm not liberal enough or whatever. I got people on the right of me. They're experts in committees. They barely got a high school diploma. They may not even have that, but they're testifying in front of me as a medical expert. Yeah. And I'll tell you, I walked out last night. I will not sit there and listen to a man who trying to destroy public education, the foundation of democracy in our state, especially with a trial coming up in April and it's going to be potentially about bribery. and
This
vouchers.
is usually what happens. You remember when I talked about the kid running down the hill?
Well,
His head gets right out in
no,
front of his face?
you threw that rock, and I'm gonna toss it right back at you. And a man who ended summer food program for kids just to make a political point. Anyone who either side of the aisle that won't feed a kid, don't tell me how Christian you are. So, yes, I wasn't about to listen to Bill Lee. Not another minute.
Just so you know, I didn't know you walked out. Thanks for fessing up.
Yeah.
Oh, frankly, I didn't know anybody walked out.
I thought you were excused yesterday.
I got back in time.
He got back in time to walk out. That showed him.
You're damn right.
He's like a back row Baptist back there, and I didn't see him, and so I just saw your name on the board was an E. I didn't even know you were there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, but what is it?
Sorry.
No.
See, this is one of those. We'll judge his rant later.
8.7.
Yeah, give him feedback.
That's actually mild.
But
That's the best part about Bo. There is like you know where you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The era that we're in right now, for whether it's short-lived or long-lived, I don't know, but it's gotten to where if you're willing to compromise with somebody to get something done, then you're not a purist.
Right.
And so people would rather be correct than win, and that's I see that occurring. Sometimes, if I can get this much further down the field,
You're a piece of the pie.
yeah, and so it's like I need to work, and sometimes I have to agree. I have to accept things that I don't necessarily like 100%. But if the most of it is good for the people in my district, then I need to go ahead and vote for it, regardless of my personal view on it. And sometimes that's very, very tough. Whenever that's one of those that we call hold your nose and push the button. Is that if you're
That's kind of what Ryan was talking about, right? It's
Yeah.
not about me.
Right.
It's
I
about
think
these
that's
people
been
behind
the
me.
genius of Tennessee as a state. I mean, I think we've had especially political tradition of like we've had a lot of, the state's been one party or the other different times, but there's always been a strong middle, and the state's always been known for having producing a lot of leaders who I think outkick the coverage. We've had a lot of, especially at the federal level, people that really kind of were leaders in the Senate, leaders in the Congress. Who could build these bipartisan coalitions and be practical. And I think the part of one of the ideas for this thing we're trying to do is like kind of trying to bring that back a little bit more, because I think we've strayed pretty far from the days of Howard Baker and
I think there are some
Yeah.
people, it seems like, that do take a good
Jim
approach to
Sassman.
it.
Yeah.
Well,
It
I
just
think
seems
that's-
like
yeah.
overall, you look at some people, it's like, oh, they don't. It seems like they have no idea who's sitting around them, right? And
Yeah.
some people, I think, are intentional about sitting down and taking opportunity.
But and I think the three guys at this table, I mean,
With
we look at this as service. I mean, I know it hinders both of their careers or what they do in private. They could be doing a whole lot more. Oh, I know, yeah. And my job, if I'm not out in front of people, talking to them and selling, I'm not succeeding. So, I mean, the three of us, we're there to serve our citizens of our district and the state,
and again, well, I was just gonna say, and again, I see the world through a completely different lens when it comes to public policy than Bo does. But I care about my children the same way that Bo cares about his children. I like to go to Cabo. He likes to go to Cabo. So, yeah, we haven't, but who knows if we ever will. Yeah, and so you're able, whenever you get to, now then, when I was younger, I'll have to say that who knows if I would have been a firebrand and the Lord let me get old enough to be self-aware enough to have a little bit of discernment to back myself down. Sometimes.
I'm gonna grow old someday.
but it's it's okay. It's okay for us to see the world differently.
Yeah.
But it's still okay for us to have lunch together.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
and that's what we need more of. I think
Right.
that's
The
thing.
challenge is that the campaign finance laws are completely different now. So and even though it's great, and I think we should have them, the problem is we don't have the ability to spend time with each other anymore. It has to be.
Explain that. Like,
It has
how's
to be
that-
in large groups. Like there was a time where, like Kevin's the chairman of Commerce Committee. There used to be a time where he and his subcommittee chairman and all the Republicans and Democrats on that committee could go have dinner together, talk about the bills that are in front of them, and so that when they come up in committee the next week, they'll know a little bit more about the bills. Now that's illegal. If you have an event, it has to be all 132 members all the time. And so the relational component is completely lost, but what we did gain was transparency. So the trade-off...
You can't ever go to just sit down with each other?
Well, we can, but there's not enough time. I mean, there's literally...
And, like I used to go out to dinner or lunch with, it was 3 or 4 guys from far East Tennessee. As far extreme right as you could be. We agreed on very little. We agreed on education policy most of the time. But my caucus would be saying, what are you doing going to lunch with them? Their guys on their side, what are y'all plotting? We're eating. That's what we're doing. That's what we're plotting.
What you're doing is you're building trust.
Well, exactly. Well, if I know his kid's name, if I know what's going on in his life, if I know what's happening in his life, I have a little bit more compassion. We don't hate each other. We understand each other. And you can get a whole lot more done, to understand what's going on. And from his point of view, like you said, we may not agree, but if we understand where each other's coming from and, how he got there, you can get beyond that to get to that compromise to maybe get to a better place for both of us.
Well, I think it's learning how to disagree without being disagreeable.
Right.
It's really easy to do if your heart's in the right place when you do it. I mean, this week I had 3 different people from the other side of the aisle come sit down with me. I have a relationship. We sit down. They went through their bills because they wanted to get them funded. And so we went through them, and I said, hey, you need to take your amendment, make an amendment for this bill, put it on that guy's bill, and I bet it would pass because it made his bill better. And so they're working together, and I'm encouraging them to do that. But then on the other side, I've got people on both sides of the aisle that don't even know my name, and we've served together for 4 years. Yeah. And you're like, how does that happen? The fact of the matter is, one is them focused and the other is district focused, and that makes a huge difference.
I'll give you a perfect example. Speaker Sexton and I had a bill together last year to make it a felony to call in a threat to a school. Mm-hmm. My side, some people on the far left have lost their mind over this bill, and they keep attacking Speaker as well as me over and over, saying we need to do this and this to fix this bill. And he and I are both like, we're not. Right. We're it's fine the way it is, and we're pushing forward, and they can keep throwing the rocks, but we're both tired of people threatening our kids' school. They're like, well, you're going to get this kid who has this problem arrested and, handcuffed, blah, blah. I'm like, well, how about the several hundred kids that are traumatized every other week and have to hide in storage room closets? You don't seem to care about those kids and their educational experience. Mm-hmm. So, I mean,
I think that is really good. I think it's like when you can find things like that, who cares, right? Who cares whose bill it is? Who cares?
Exactly. Well, we've got to make those first steps.
Well, and sometimes you have to understand that legislation is not presented to be passed. That's right. And so I had a colleague from across the aisle come to me today to meet with me about 2 bills, and he said, I know that neither one of these is going to get passed. He said, but you being the chairman, he said, I wanted you to know what my plan was. And I said, okay. And this is a guy who has served a long time in the legislature. And he said, I want to prove a point. If you could keep somebody from calling the question until I have my say, I would appreciate it. He said, because I know it's not going to get approved, but I want to say this. And as he represents 70,000 people, 75,000 people, he earned the right to have a say on that matter. Right. Is his bill going to pass? No. And on the other one, it's purely a platform that actually he and I together are going to gripe about something. And we share the same issues. There's literally nothing we can do about it but we have a gripe and we're going to air it in a subcommittee.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's about getting it out there so that maybe somebody else hears and has it.
Well, that's where it starts. That's where it starts. That maybe in a few years that grows into something.
And we had a really good conversation about this other matter that sometimes people get emotional about, and it's a conversation that's going on nationally. And he and I disagree about the very core premises of it. Mm-hmm. But because he came to me to explain where his heart was, why he was troubled by this, why he felt necessary to do this, you know what? I'm gonna let him. I told him, I said, this is going to be an emotional issue for a lot of people. And he said, yeah, but I want to say this. I said, okay, well, just understand and we'll go on about it. But now there won't be any trauma from the drama.
Right.
We know it's coming, but it's a senior member who has earned the right to voice a say.
Yeah.
And so even if he's not on my team, because legislation is, or the legislature is a team game. Yeah. It's about math. Yeah. Can you get 50 votes?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
if a new legislator came in, and because I've seen legislators come in who have barely even talked to their predecessor, and to me, I've never done any job where I wouldn't want to speak to my predecessor, even if they were completely on the other side. They still know more about that job than I do, right? I guess what tips? I just heard one right there, right? Like if you've got something and you really want to get your voice heard, particularly if you're in a supermajority and you can get shut down before you even say, hey, go talk to the chair and try to be, I think vulnerability in all walks of life goes a really long way, and sort of saying, this is where I'm coming from.
Mutual respect.
Yeah.
Treat somebody the way you want to be treated.
And I think, and they're exactly right with what they're saying, but on our side, it's a little different because we have such slim numbers. We may only have one person on a committee, and they may be that freshman. Our freshmen don't have time for a redshirt season. They're in the starting lineup. They're out on the field from day one. It's ready for kickoff. They're playing.
Respect is earned. It's not demanded.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
I think you can tell pretty quickly if someone starts demanding things,
right.
then they're not going anywhere. And the fact is, if he walks in my office, which he's done before, and I've walked in my office, what's going to happen is the more times you walk into somebody's office, and when did you come in?
2012.
Okay, so I'm the only one in the room that served when we just had a simple majority. We couldn't call a question. We couldn't leave. It was a dramatic deal, and it was a much better time because you didn't have the room to have these polar ends anymore. It was everybody was kind of scooched in the middle, and you had to go in order just to get out and go home on Thursday afternoon. Everybody had to agree, which it was dramatically different. But if you could just, what I would tell people is aim small, miss small. Walk into the subcommittee chairman's office of question. Go and meet with them individually, like he did, like the member did with him, like 3 members have done with me this week. Sit down and say, hey, this is what I want to do. Tell me what your thoughts about it. It will dramatically change the whole thing, because there's a sense that's crept in a little bit, I think, particularly for those people that I like, that there's this cynicism that builds this wall that says, I ain't gonna pass this anyways. I'm just gonna go in there and have my peace and leave. But the fact of the matter is, I had a conversation with somebody this week. I said, hey, they have good ideas sometimes. We need to listen to them sometimes, and even a blind mouse can find some cheese every now and then. And so we need to have that discussion. The big challenge is, I think for us, it's taking the time. I think it's for you guys, it's taking the time, and recognizing that at the baseline, we're all here to do the same thing, and if it's about me, then I'm in the wrong.
Well, like last year, we had a freshman come into a subcommittee you and I were on, and I could see you had great questions over their piece of legislation, and I kind of tried to step in and say, hey, I think he's got some good questions. Why don't we roll this week? You get with him, see what amendment he's got, and that bill eventually passed.
And I didn't vote for it. But I helped her.
Yeah, well, exactly. But I saw where it was going, and I was just like, hey, you need to freshmen, they don't understand that. You need to roll that bill, go get with him.
One piece of advice is if somebody says, "Hey, why don't you roll it?" You might want to
Listen.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
especially
always
if-
advice to be heeded.
Especially when they're this,
Especially if they're on your side.
Yeah.
Cool.
And if they can feel the winds blowing and you can't, you know.
Is all of you really respect new members if you can tell that they really are trying to accomplish something?
if you feel respected, probably.
And as opposed to just grandstanding for kind of personal advancement or trying to generate headlines or Twitter celebrity
right.
status.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And we've got them on both sides of the aisle. We've got.
We may have fewer, but we definitely have both happening.
Well, I think what is interesting is really it doesn't matter if you're an entrepreneur or if you're in politics or what it is. Most all of us have imposter syndrome at some point, right? And so I got to think if you're a new legislator and you're coming in, it's intimidating. Everybody seems like they know what they're doing. But I think realizing we're all learning every single day, and you guys are pretty approachable.
What they underestimate is the fact that we all remember what it was like to be a freshman too.
Yeah.
And we understand, and we also understand some of the first people in the place to be nice to me, and two of them are sitting here at this table. Whenever you're trying to figure out you're just trying to figure out what your job is. And when somebody's nice to you, then you form a relationship with them and you're more respectful of them. Mm-hmm. And so, it's almost like going to school. I mean, really, who can I find somebody to sit down and eat lunch? Who's going to let me sit at their table in the cafeteria?
Yeah, one of the things that I it's still mind-boggling to me, being a financially challenged kid from Upper East Tennessee that had a mullet. His family, I never saw him vote, but every day for 15 years that I get to spend in Nashville, and I walk by that Capitol that's been there long before me, and you don't have this sense of like, what in the world am I doing here? You're probably not ready to be there. Right. And so I think if you don't really understand that, because it is a huge, weighty responsibility that even after 15 years, I still can't fully comprehend. And it could be anyone other than me. And some days it probably should be somebody other than me. But if you have that and it hasn't changed your heart, and it hadn't created it with you, this new identity that you didn't have before you get there, it's time to go home.
I mean, just to sort of bring it full circle, this doesn't matter. This doesn't matter if you're rural or you're urban. This we're just talking about like human fundamentals of respect and being open and curious.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? Thank you guys. We could sit here all night, and we appreciate that you took the time to sit with us. But I hope it was all beneficial to you guys.
Nothing I heard tonight was a surprise.
What was your favorite part? Do you have a favorite moment of both?
I need to remind myself to bring a napkin next time in case I do get some spittle on my face. I'm just kidding.
Bo, you're a great person to kind of jab at, because you're so passionate, which is really good for your constituents.
It's a good character quality in people.
That's right. Well, thank you guys all for coming. We'll just sum up. If you have a one word, I'm entertained by Bo. Always.
No, I thought that was very very stimulating. I thought it was really good discussion and some really good takeaways.
My friends.
Yeah. Not so partisan.
Yeah. That's truly Spirit of Bipartisanship.
Yeah.
That was really good.
Do you have a one word?
I'm sorry. I'm just spent.
He's
Exhausted. Yeah.
Well, thank you, and thanks for joining us for another episode of the Spirit of Bipartisanship.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
It's awesome.
This episode is brought to you by Lockland Insurance Advisors, a locally owned and operated insurance agency in Nashville. Lockland Insurance Advisors is a team of insurance agents and advisors licensed in personal and commercial lines. Lockland is dedicated to providing objective advice and custom coverage options from an array of curated industry-leading carriers. To learn more about Lockland Insurance Advisors, get free quotes for home, including short-term rental properties, auto, life, or commercial insurance, or to review your current insurance coverage, call them today at 615-266-0246 or visit them online at heylockland.com.